On Press Perspective today, we touch upon Korea's summer cultural practices and temple matchmaking. Do stay with us. Hello and welcome to Press Perspective for this Thursday, July 16th here in Seoul. I'm Min Sun-hee. As South Korea ushers in the hottest days of summer, food, dating and the big screen are all making headlines. For more on this, I have Thomas Maresca with American news agency UPI here in the studio. Thomas, welcome back.
Hi, great to be here.
I also have writer Colin Marshall with us. Colin, it's great to have you here.
Thanks for having me.
Colin, one of the most well-known traditions during the summer here in Korea is eating boyangsik, stamina-boosting food. That being said, what's your favorite summer food here in Korea?
Well, the one I was eating just last night, and because it's the day you eat it, it was the day you eat it, Samgyetang, which is a kind of ginseng chicken soup, stuffed chicken with rice and jujubes, other things like that. It's got a strong flavor, but not one that is very off-putting for foreigners typically. My mom likes it too, you know. I think it plays well abroad. It's one of the Korean foods that people like sort of wherever it happens to be served. And it is, yes, a summer food here on the basis of one of these four Chinese character expressions, meaning essentially combat heat with heat, or put heat against heat. So in the hot summertime, you eat hot food like this boiling soup, or even I've seen some people interpret it as also spicy food. You know, eat even spicier food than usual to take your mind off of the heat, or to have this sense of balancing out the heat outside you with the heat inside you, I suppose. And to my mind, 이열치열 always implied the existence of 이한치한, fight cold with cold, eat cold things like bingsu or ice cream in the wintertime. And I, for a long time, thought this was a real concept as well in Korean culture, only to find out that it actually isn't. It's not something people really believe. But 이열치열 does have currency in the culture, and I think after 10 years here, I'm starting to believe it too.
Right. Thomas, Korean boyangsik, it's reportedly gaining popularity beyond borders as well amid the spread of Hallyu. What summer dishes are attracting attention overseas?
I was going to say probably the most well-known one is Samgyetang. You know, and it's interesting. I think it's probably some of these dishes are spreading maybe more regionally first. You know, I saw an article recently from Singapore where they were talking about this proliferation of Samgyetang restaurants there. And, you know, there's even kind of South Korean chain restaurants that are opening branches in Singapore and like Shanghai, I saw in Sydney. So that's probably, you know, the best known one, but it's even, I think, known elsewhere in the Western world. And as, you know, Colin mentioned, it is something that is, it's like chicken soup. I mean, a lot of places have a version of chicken soup, you know, and I think people can easily connect to that and, you know, enjoy it. You know, and it also kind of ties in, I think, to, you know, as you also mentioned, you know, just the rise of Hallyu, where there's so much content. There's a lot of content that are, you know, are Korea-based shows. Like there was this, you know, show called Hey, First Time in Korea. I don't know if you've seen that, where, you know, it's sort of expats inviting foreign friends, and some of that is like, try this food, try this food. And I think, you know, I've seen that kind of spreading out a bit into the, you know, info sphere as to try this or try that. So, you know, I saw something recently about Samgyetang, another summer soup. This actually is a colder soup. It's this vinegar mustard soup, and that's something that people eat as well. And this time it's shredded chicken. And I've seen, you know, some articles about that popping up. And, you know, I think in general, just also in general, I think this kind of tips into, you know, Korean sort of wellness culture is spreading a little bit. Like I had done a story not that long ago about Olive Young, the big K-beauty retailer opening in the US, and sort of their strategy is evolving to get into more wellness-focused products and ingredient-based products. I mean, it's happening here domestically, but that's also something that they're kind of exporting abroad. So I think Korea is starting to get that level of, you know, another little facet of interest in Korean, you know, culture and ways of doing things. So I think this idea of like, oh, eating food that has healthful properties, you know, is something that is the message is kind of getting out there as well.
Right, indeed. Colin, you mentioned Cheol earlier on, fighting heat with heat by eating hot food. Is there any other thing that you find particularly intriguing about the way Koreans cope with the summer heat?
You see many behaviors on display every summer. One of them, it's been around a while, but I think foreigners who visit here will take note quickly, more so than sort of long-term residents like myself, when they see Koreans walking down the street wearing fans, whether they have one clipped to their shirt, or it's these sort of headphone-type fans where instead of the actual ear cups with speakers, they have cups with fans inside them, miniature fans. Maybe they spray water. The water spraying fans were big there for a while. So personal fan technology takes many different forms here, and it sends me back to when I was first learning Korean. I heard this lesson where the teacher was saying during the summer in Korea, he likes to go to the bank, like to beat the heat. The bank is the most air-conditioned space. And I was thinking, okay, I mean, I guess I'll put it in my mind. I can go have a cup of free water at the bank if it really gets bad on the way from one place to another. But this summer, it's been hot as well in the West. And on social media, the US and European social media, there's been this whole sort of clash of the civilizations about air conditioner use. And the Americans defend their air conditioner use. Europeans sort of attack it. Americans say, like, it's not as bad as you think it is. Europeans say, like, well, we didn't need it until recently. That's why we don't have it. So there's this conflict, but it ignores the fact that in Asia, Asia is off of that axis. Most countries here don't have the same income level as the US or Europe, but air conditioning is everywhere. So it's not really a matter of do you have the resources. I think there's a third way, and that gets ignored a little too much. I think the US and Europe could look toward Asia to see how the summer, how a true summer is handled.
Right. Thomas, some say Korea's boyangsik culture, it's changing with the times, especially following, of course, the ban on dog meat consumption. What changes have you been observing?
Yeah, this has been a tremendous change, actually. This year, so the ban was passed in 2024, but there was a 3-year phase-out period. So this is actually the last oknal that dog meat is even, legally available. And, I've seen, there's been a couple of articles recently popping up because, Chobok is one of the traditional days where this soup, this boyangsik is the traditional dog meat stew, and people also look to it as a health stamina soup. So this is the time really when the great majority of this food was eaten. And so, but this a couple of local media outlets did stories just yesterday or a couple of days ago. The last remaining little clusters of these boyangsik restaurants. There's one in Jongno-gu at Shinjin Market was a place that had these old places, and they say, the traffic is way, way down, and people are kind of calling it the last boyangsik. I mean, some people are still going to eat it, and it's really a generational thing. It's usually like much older people that have this tradition of eating it. But just the number of farms and suppliers that have been shrinking and shrinking over this phase-out period. It's also raised the price quite a bit. It's maybe 2 or 3 times more expensive to get these soups anyway. So, less and less people are certainly eating those. And I've been working on a story about the rise in kind of pet culture here and just how dramatically quickly sort of dog ownership and just the whole sort of ecosystem around, the whole pet lifestyle has grown, so quickly. And this is kind of, coinciding with that. And I was talking to some activist groups that had worked on the dog meat closure this week, and they were really commenting. Even they who'd worked on this issue for a long time were surprised at how fast the change came. Like once it actually came, it had just been floating around for a while, but this ban, once it came into effect, it's just had like a dramatic case. And they were telling me, when they started, there was still something like 400,000 dogs or more, 450,000 dogs that were being kept on these meat farms a couple of years ago, and now the number's like down to 20 or 30,000 left, and then, by the start of next year, it's gonna be gone. So it's amazingly quick, and it really is sort of the power of the legislation passing. I think it had been phasing out for a while, but it was still kind of this hanging on as a tradition. But now it's just really kind of almost fully disappeared. Yeah.
Right. Thomas, let's now turn to another case story of much interest. A Buddhist temple here in South Korea is playing matchmaker, and this reality is making international headlines as well. Could you tell us a bit more about this?
Yeah, so there was a couple of articles recently in Reuters, and BBC did one, and there's been these matchmaking events. There was one this past weekend. It was at a temple, a 7th century temple in Naksan-sa hillside. It's a hilltop temple in Yangyang County, which is like the northeast of South Korea. And yeah, it was basically a Buddhist foundation that's launching this blind date program to try and just kind of do speed dating, matchmaking sort of thing. And this was actually lasted for a whole weekend though, and they said it was drew a big interest. There was something like over 4,000 applicants for just 20 spots. And so they were basically, men and women were together for this weekend, kind of wearing the traditional Korean temple attire. And, they just have all these games and matchmaking activities and sort of like speed rounds of talking to people. And, they're doing a yoga class together. And then they would just do these sort of rotation dates, one-on-one dates. And then, there's something similar was in Daegu, Donghwa-sa, another temple that was, I think it was a couple of months ago, but BBC just did an article about it as well, like in the last few days. And, similar thing, I think something like 1,600 people applied for a couple of stops. And, that article was actually funny because they were quoting the Buddhist, the head of the temple, who was sort of pointing to the tradition that Buddhist monks have had in kind of taking action when the country is in trouble. And they've had these sort of militant histories, and now they're kind of saying low birth rate is this similar crisis. So this is, meant to address, obviously, Korea's declining birth rates. And I think it's grown, there's been a lot of other government-run programs, and it's, become one more attempt, in this toolkit of things to try and bring the birth rate up. I mean, it's growing, it has ticked up the last couple of years, but, still is well below, the sort of replacement standard. But, it's an interesting, it's a very, very interesting attempt to do it. And it seems, it was successful. The people that joined seem to, according to these stories, at least enjoy it. Whether they made a match, I'm not positive. But yeah, it's a very colorful story that a lot of media has gotten attention.
Right, indeed. And against this backdrop, Colin, there are quite a number of foreign media outlets who reportedly say the dating has become increasingly difficult for young people here in South Korea. Do you agree? And if so, what are your reasons?
I think I'm not part of the demographic they're talking about in these articles, certainly, but as you say, foreign media has paid a lot of attention, strangely in a way, to this issue of Korean dating difficulties. But I think with this story, with this type of story, and with many stories about Korea in the especially American media, it's a way of dealing with the United States' own anxieties about its own problems, displacing them onto another country to an extent. I mean, we saw a big example of this with the stories about the ostensible 4B movement of women in Korea who reject marriage, dating, children, all that. But to the best of my ability to determine, if talking to journalists here who've looked into it, the 4B movement doesn't really exist in a meaningful way in South Korea. You wouldn't know that from reading the New York Times, where it's described as, oh, it's sweeping the nation over here. Well, this has more to do with gender relations in the US, and it's a way to deal with that in an indirect fashion, I would say. But I think there's a truth here, that it really is, dating is also more difficult in South Korea than it used to be, in large part, and this is true of other societies as well, because there's less of a cultural script for it than there used to be. Nowadays, in 2026, you don't have the local matchmaker set you up, and even the university is not what it used to be, as far as, you meet somebody in a group, and then you date there and you get married after college. It happens, but it's no longer just the way you do things. There's less of a way you do things with dating or anything else in South Korea than there used to be. And I think a lot of people are not prepared for that, or the society itself is not prepared for that kind of situation where there are a vacuum of protocols to follow. And so people have had to find alternatives, such as the one Thomas just described, or other programs in government-run speed dating, all these kinds of things that we've discussed here on this show before. these are attempts to replace the cultural script or to write a new one. And with all the difficulties you would expect there, we've also seen pushes for dating apps in South Korea here and there. I've seen ads in places like Hongdae. You see ads directed towards certain segments of the young population, like here's a new way to meet friends. They put it very euphemistically. And by no means have dating apps taken over youth culture in the way they have in, say, the United States. I mean, my generation really was the one to go feet first into the dating app culture. Blessedly, I never had to use one myself, but from what I understand, you're there scrolling through all these people, saying yes or no to them, and people you have no connection with, you've never even seen before, you're just seeing images of, and you're expected to sort of evaluate, assess whether you can form a connection, and you meet them with this heavy burden of expectations, and it just seems impossible to me to do something like that. Whether that'll take off in Korea or not, I'm not sure, but I think it's easy to understand why there are these stories about how difficult it's become to date, to get married, to form families, just because the rules seem to have been scrapped. The script seems to have been thrown away or much weakened. And without guidelines to follow, I think people are not made to renegotiate the rules of every human relationship as they go, to build it from the ground up. So I think that's a big part of the problem, but it's not just here. It feels worse here, and maybe it is, but this is to an extent present in most societies.
Right, so universal to a certain extent. Thomas, in the meantime, what's your take on these unconventional ways of trying to set young people up?
Yeah, I think, you have to temper expectations if you're talking about it in the sense of, oh, this is going to make a dent in the kind of demographic crisis. I don't think, the numbers really add up to that, and obviously there's other things that government, can do that would have a bigger role to play, like, affordable childcare and family-friendly policies in general, subsidies and incentives, and even promoting gender equality. All of these solutions have been, proposed and implemented to some extent. But, I think as a device to kind of, address a lot of what Colin was just saying, just this way for people to meet each other, in these environments where it has become a lot more difficult, and it's, the idea of, the dating. I saw a statistic actually. It does seem like the younger generation is not looking to dating apps as much. There was a study a couple of years ago that it said something like 60% of dating app users are between 30 and 49, and then like those below 27 are only like 20% or something. So, and it kind of also seems to speak to broadly, and obviously not just here, but I think around the world, you do see this pushback a bit of, say, Gen Z that is kind of rejecting some of the all digital way of life, and looking for sort of more analog things. I know, I feel like Colin has written about sort of this retro trend, and there's just something about, people know that they don't want to live their whole lives maybe mediated by screens, but at the same time, there's the same types of opportunities don't exist in this world, and maybe some people don't have the skills kind of built in to, navigate. So in that sense, like anything that is kind of moving people into the real world and just even giving them, like, even if they're silly like ways to start engaging in conversation, I think, I'm all for it. I think it's a good idea. I think there were some pushback earlier on a few years ago. Seoul City had been trying some of these speed dating programs, and there seemed to be kind of a rejection of it in a sense of, oh, what are we wasting our funds for? But they've come back, and I think in some of it too is like they're getting away from the language of, oh, this is a birth rate thing. It's just more of like, this is a social meeting people thing. And I actually covered one like a year and a half ago that was a Valentine's Day event by the Seoul Metropolitan Government, and they're doing it a little more clever. They have themes, this was set around art. So, with all that said, it's not the ultimate solution, but I do feel like, and it's not just government, like, obviously there's Buddhist temples, I do feel like the society, there's a real need for something like that in society. So this is kind of, I like the idea of trying to find creative ways to just fill that void in a way of
Right,
connection.
indeed. The media loves it too. That's why it's been covered quite a bit, right?
For
we have
sure.
time for one more question, just one question before we end today. As I mentioned, we have to talk about the big screen now. Director Na Hong-jin's film, Hope, it's playing at theaters as we speak. There is a lot of attention for this movie. Briefly tell us why.
For a variety of reasons as well. This is a bit of a comeback for Na Hong-jin. who is one of the most acclaimed directors of his generation here. He's about 50 years old. He last came out with a movie in 2016, so it's been 10 years. That movie was very successful. It was called Goksong, or The Wailing, I think, abroad in English. And that was the signal film of the K-horror, or the current K-horror movement, where it was, these are horror movies that are made scary by their use of traditional Korean themes, in that case shamanism, and also sort of tied in regional history and all that, conflicts between Japan and Korea. So it had a richly Korean quality to it, and that proved to be highly exportable in a way that I think was surprising to a lot of people. And he's taken a different tack with this new movie, Hope, or Hope, which is, it seems to be, maybe you could call it a monster movie, you could call it disaster, you could call it action. And I hear that the first hour is very much, I mean, action fans of all countries will thrill to it in a way that I don't think they've thrilled to anything from Hollywood in this century. But it takes turns that would be, I think, unexpected to a lot of people as well. And so its reviews have been, the reviews always say things that sound very intriguing. They also have reservations about sort of the special effects. Maybe those aren't what you would expect, given that this might be the most expensive Korean movie ever made. But it's, you know, it reminds me of when I got into Korean movies to begin with, which was really the way that I got into Korean culture, watching Korean films. And they always felt different from Hollywood movies or movies from other Asian countries, because they would combine elements of different genres that might seem incompatible in the West, emotional registers that didn't go together in the West, and even they would violate dramatic laws of Hollywood movies. So that was all very refreshing to me. I enjoyed seeing those movies and wondering, I wonder what about this country, Korea, causes filmmakers to be able to make movies like this. And that sort of began my journey, and that was 20-something years ago. But I think this is very much an extension of that. So I'll be intrigued to watch it myself, and I think Westerners will also be intrigued to know how this movie uses foreign actors like Alicia Vikander, Michael Fassbender. Given that it's a movie set in the 70s or 80s in small-town seaside Korea, what's going on there? Na Hong-jin has found a creative use, I think, for these foreigners, but you'll have to go buy your ticket to find out, I suppose.
Well, I got my ticket. I'm watching it on Saturday. I probably will get to watch it before you. I'll let you know that.
Please do.
All right, I'm afraid that's all the time we have. Colin, thank you so much for your time and your thoughts.
Thank you.
Thomas, thank you very much for your insights.
Thank you.
Right, on that note, we end this week's editions of Press Perspective, as tomorrow, Friday, is a public holiday to mark Constitution Day. So see you next Monday.